Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we're talking about the Houston Rockets today in this video, another trade guide where we break down what teams could look to do at the trade deadline this year. Last year, we had a really successful time here on YouTube talking about the NBA trade deadline, but this year we're prefacing it with videos for each and every NBA team. This is the fourth one up on the channel. Huge shout out to one of the comments saying, bruh, do the Houston Rockets next. Here they are just for you. So make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and let me know in the comment section which team you would like to see next. I do read each and every single comment on the channel, so let me know down there and we'll get to your team as soon as possible. Let's jump into it now with a video preview. In this video, we're going to talk about the players that I could see being tradable from the Houston Rockets perspective. Who will lead executive Rafael Stone consider trading at the deadline? Also, I want to issue my condolences to the Silas family. Of course, Stephen Silas lost his father, Paul Silas, someone who's been in and around the NBA for a long time. So definitely the NBA family feeling the loss of Paul Silas. So condolences again to not only Stephen Silas, but to his entire family as well. Then we're going to look at the draft pick situation for the Houston Rockets and talk about what picks that they have coming up this year. And we're also going to look at next year's picks as well, because usually when teams are building, it's important to know what draft equity you have in store that's going to help build your team. We're going to look at the long-term cap space for Houston, a team that's really interesting in terms of cap space. This year, they have nearly as much dead cap as they do actual active contracts on their roster. I believe they have about $62 million of dead cap this year and about $73 million of active roster cap in terms of their current contracts. So they're going to have $62 million freed up going into next year just from shedding some of that dead cap. So they're going to be in a pretty good spot going into the offseason. Then we're going to talk about if the Houston Rockets are going to be a buyer or a seller. I think that there's actually a little bit more of an interesting discussion on this than I think some people really expect. You look at Houston, you say, oh, obvious seller, right? Well, I'm going to talk that through a little bit later on in the video on why I think that it's not a 100% foregone conclusion for the Houston Rockets to be sellers. Right now, they're rolling 6-4 in their last 10. They've been playing a lot better as of late. Now, I don't think that they're trying to buy to make the playoffs, but I think that there's an interesting position that could open itself up to them making maybe one or two moves that positions them better long-term, even if it means bringing in some guys right now. And then some projected activity level. Do I see the Rockets making a ton of moves? No moves, maybe a little bit here and there. What do I see for Houston at the trade deadline? Last year, we had one of the craziest trade deadlines ever. This year, I think a lot of people are expecting that same level of activity. I think it might be just a hair quieter, but you never really know. Things can get wild pretty quick in the NBA. So right now in December, I'm saying, who knows? We'll see what happens. And maybe by February, things will be going crazy. And who knows who's going to be on what team at that point. So Rockets fans, let's get into it here now with some of those tradable players. And it's hard to see a lot of guys right now in Houston getting traded. Just in terms of how many players they have that are young. I love some of their young guys. I love Jalen Green, one of the best young players in the league. He's been putting up big time numbers this year. KPJ's been putting up big numbers as well. His contract's about to turn into a pretty big number next year too. Now, it is not a terrible contract because most of it's non-guaranteed and they have a team option on the back end of it. They have ways of getting out of that. So ultimately, if the KPJ thing never really fully pans out the way they were hoping, it's not a bad contract by any means. And then Jabari Smith, who struggled really to start the year, I think he's starting to come around a little bit. We've seen some of the flaws in his game and why I thought he's not as can't miss of a prospect as others seem to have thought. But I really love Tari Eason. Tari Eason was such a home run pick by this Rockets team, and we haven't gotten to see a lot of Ty Washington yet. But in the little bit of time we have, I think he's shown some flashes for sure. This Houston's team is really young, and I think that is one key indicator here when you look at the tradable players. There's not a lot of veterans on this team. So who are you going to sell? We have to start with Eric Gordon. He's got 1 year after this year, and it's a non-guaranteed final year of that contract. So I could see some teams looking to buy him. Now, I've heard that the Rockets are looking for a first-round pick for him. I'm sorry, you're just not going to get that for Eric Gordon. He's 34 years old, and his production just hasn't been there the last 2 or 3 years, honestly. For how he is as a player, I think that you can maybe get a second or 2 second-round picks if you find a team that's really desperate, especially if an injury comes between now and February 9th at the trade deadline. Maybe a team's going to say, hey, we really need a little bit of a bench spark plug. Eric Gordon could do that for us. We've seen him in the playoffs before. He's been productive in roles where he's asked to score the basketball. Now, that was 3-4 years ago. So what are we going to get from Eric Gordon right now? He's one of the worst defenders in the NBA. You look at his defensive rating year in, year out, and it's brutal. He's not a good team defender. He's not a great on-ball individual defender. Now, I think his defensive rating doesn't do it justice with how okay he is at times. Now, he's not like the worst defender in the league, but he's not a good one, is the whole point. Boban Marjanovic, he's a culture guy. I don't think the Rockets would want to trade him, but they might have to attach his money if a deal were to get done. $3.5 million gives you some flexibility. Josh Christopher is one of those names that I actually think going into the year, not a lot of people would have expected to be a potential trade candidate. 3 years, $9.3 million. And of course, it's a team option coming off of his rookie deal here to end it. I could see some teams sniffing around Josh Christopher. He's gotten some DNP CDs this year. He spent some time in the G League with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. So Josh Christopher is a player that I think should be on the radar of a lot of other teams, honestly. Now, I don't know if the Rockets are going to trade him. They don't really have a big incentive to move off of him at this point. But if the right package comes around, I wouldn't be surprised. Garrison Matthews is on one of the best contracts in the league. 3 years, $6.2 million. He's an awesome 3-and-D level player with the ability to run off screens, knock down the long ball, but he's also a really, really good competitive defender who steps in, takes a ton of charges, draws a ton of moving screens. He's one of the best in the league at that as well. Garrison Matthews was a really sneaky, nice pickup for this Rockets team a couple of years ago, and he's honestly one of those players that if he made more money, there'd still be a lot of trade interest in him at $2 million a year with a fully non-guaranteed contract and team option in the final year. Pretty much every single team in the league would love to have a guy like Garrison Matthews on their roster. So he's someone that they'll get some calls about. Now, it's hard to match money for a player like him at $2 million. But the one nice thing is maybe they can get a second-round pick for a team that has one of those $2 to $3 million trade exceptions. It's hard to fit decent players into those small trade exceptions like that. So Garrison Matthews is immediately one of the more valuable in the league at that price point. Honestly, out of all these guys, I honestly think Garrison Matthews is probably the most or second most valuable player in terms of contract, age, what he can bring to a good team. I think he's right up there. The other guy would be KJ Martin, who at 2 years, $3.6 million team option next season. Again, another pretty good contract for someone who brings elite athleticism. I think there's a ton of teams in the league that could use a high flyer like KJ Martin. He's gotten better each and every year in the league. Remember, this offseason talked about wanting to get out of Houston. They played the patience game with him, and he's having a pretty decent start to the season. Nothing spectacular, but we've seen some growth from him. And for me with KJ Martin, I think he's somebody that if he did find the right environment, could be a really productive bench player for a team that is hoping to go far, probably in 15, maybe 20 minutes a game. And that role would be a little bit less clear come playoff time, but he's still someone that there's a lot of value to add in as maybe an 8th or 9th guy to a team. So we'll see if teams sniff around some of these players. I think KJ Martin, Garrison Matthews are two of the most interesting for me here. Eric Gordon's been on the trade block since they traded Harden. If they were getting good offers for him, he would have been traded by now. Honestly, this is the youngest team in the league. They have no worry about playing a bunch of young guys. They like doing that, which you can see how it produces a lot of losses. Feels like they're playing well this year and they're 9-18. They're just not going to win a ton of games, which is okay. They're looking at the draft pick. They want to lose games right now. But if the right offer comes around for Eric Gordon, it's not like they're going to be patient and pass on it. If there's the right offer out there, what they're looking for, they're going to pull the trigger on that for sure. So let's get into some of those draft pick situations. What do they have right now on the table, and how could it impact the future of this team? Well, they have their own first this year. They have Milwaukee's first this year, and they only have swap rights to Brooklyn's first this season. A lot of people, there's a misconception there. They do not own Brooklyn's pick this year. Brooklyn owns its own pick as long as Brooklyn's pick is essentially lower than Houston. If Houston picks before Brooklyn will keep their own pick. Now, if somehow Brooklyn were to win the lottery or something, it gives Houston another chance at maybe getting Victor Wembanyama. But even if they don't get the first pick, there's some really talented players in this draft. Rockets fans, I would really advise you go check out some of my 2023 NBA mock drafts. I spend a ton of time watching the prospects, and I've got 2 prospects here on the screen that I'm really excited about. Dylan Mitchell, somebody who is really adept playing without the basketball. I know a lot of Rockets fans probably keep a close eye on him playing for those Longhorns. He's one of the best jumpers in the class. He is an elite athlete and somebody who I think if you get him in the right skills development and you give him a lot to work with in terms of his own improvement, he could be an awesome pickup for a team, especially with how adept he is. Like I said earlier, playing without the basketball, he's an awesome dunker, spot sitter. I think Jared Vanderbilt, but way more athletic, which is, maybe not the most glowing comparison, but somebody I really like, honestly. And then Derek Whitehead, a guy who can actually just fill it up. He hasn't shot the best to begin the year for Duke, but I think that that's going to turn around as the season progresses. Now, next year, their first goes out to Oklahoma City, but if it stays in the top 4, that is protected. So Houston could hold on to that pick. So there is actually some incentive to being bad next season as well. And they also have Brooklyn's first-round pick next year, which sounds pretty desirable because you never know what's going to happen with Kevin Durant. Kyrie Irving is an expiring contract this year, so very possible that Houston could be on the up and up in terms of the draft picks. Now, when we look at their actual cap space going into this offseason, they have roughly $45 million in practical cap space. And a big reason for that is they're shedding $62 million in dead cap. Now, some of their young guys, their contracts naturally ascend. Think about Jalen Green. His money goes up every single year as a rookie. Same with Jabari Smith. Same with Josh Christopher. Same with all their guys, right? Everyone's contract, usually in the NBA, especially on a rookie deal, is ascending. So you're going to lose some of that cap space, but since they're freeing up so much dead cap, they are going to have a massive amount of cap space this offseason, and they're a team that they can say, hey, no state income tax, pretty desirable place to play. And I actually have Myles Turner here on the screen, which is going to be kind of funny to people. People are going to say, whoa, you think Houston has a shot? Not really, but from Texas, probably would like to go back home at some point. Houston could be a team that says, hey, we'll give you full starters minutes. I know some Rockets fans are going to say free Alperen Sengun. I agree. I love Alperen Sengun as a player too. Should have mentioned him earlier. But Myles Turner, I think, would be a really nice addition to this team. And there's one thing about basketball that's not similar to the NFL. Going out and signing 1 or 2 big-time free agents. Now, Myles Turner's not a star by any means, but he's a very good player. Going out and adding 2 very good players onto your roster when you only have 5 guys on the floor at a time is a massive difference, especially if Jalen Green continues to improve, if Jabari Smith Jr. starts to play a little bit better like everyone was expecting coming in. This Rockets team could look pretty dangerous. 2 teams I want to compare them to: the Phoenix Suns back in the bubble and the New Orleans Pelicans last year into the play-in. Look at those teams. Phoenix, if they weren't even invited to the bubble, everyone was super low on them. It looked like they were dead in the water. Then they go 8-0 in the bubble, and everyone's like, whoa, Phoenix is kind of nice like that. Devin Booker's an ascending star. This team's got some nice players. And then they all of a sudden trade Ricky Rubio, Kelly Oubre, and a pick for Chris Paul, and they completely remake their team and make the finals a year later. You look at New Orleans now. Last year, going into the trade deadline, they were, I believe, like 12th in the Western Conference, maybe 13th even. And they trade a pick for CJ McCollum. And they give up Josh Hart. They also get Larry Nance in that. And for me, that was a big head scratcher at the time because I thought, whoa, this team right now just gave up a pick for this season, and that pick is likely going to be in the lottery. And they really bet on themselves. I thought it was a big loss for them in the moment. And boy, was I wrong about that. That ended up panning out perfectly for New Orleans and David Griffin. Of course, they ended up going on to make the playoffs through the play-in. And then they had a great first round against those Phoenix Suns, like I talked about earlier, where they win 2 games. And now they're first in the Western Conference at the time I'm recording this because they've got that momentum on their side and they really feel like they've built something. Houston, if they end this year well, and right now it looks like they've been playing much better than we've seen them play in the last 2 years, making a big addition like a Myles Turner could actually really change the outlook of this team into something that, fans would want to go see. Right now they rank 29th in the NBA in attendance. That's not very good for those of you who aren't sure that ranking 29th out of 30 is not a good spot to be in terms of attendance. Adding a Myles Turner, improving this team would really go a long way with not only bringing back fan interest, because Rockets, by the way, they have a great fan base. Honestly, we saw how great their fan base was when James Harden was taking this team deep into the playoffs every year at the Toyota Center. They'd be loud. They'd show out. The Rockets have a really good fan base right now. There's just not a lot to cheer for. Team's young, not very good. You make a couple moves and all of a sudden you can be back into the thick of things and really improving your team dramatically in a rather short amount of time. So I think that cap space could actually really vault this team into something right now that a lot of people are not projecting for them. So do I think that they're going to be a buyer or a seller? I think there's a little bit of both going on here. I think that they could be a fountain of youth seller in terms of some of the young guys that they could look to give up. We talk about a KJ Martin, Garrison Matthews, who's not super old. There's some players in there that if other teams that are playoff teams want to make a move and get a little bit younger, but add a player who they could add into their rotation, Houston's probably one of the teams that they'd want to call. Teams that have smaller trade exceptions are going to be Houston's best friend. They're also going to be a contract dumpster. If teams want to dump money, Houston might be willing to do that if they get some draft pick equity back in return. Think about the way that Brooklyn was operating a few years ago, back when they were taking in all these bad contracts. You think of Allen Crabbe, some others as well. They would eat up contracts at the expense of a draft pick. And I think Houston still could consider themselves in that way as well, which brings us to some teams that I think that they could trade with. Now, for some other teams, when I'm doing these trade guides, I have specific examples of who they would trade and why they would trade it with them. I think the Rockets are a little bit cloudier. I think that they're going to be interested in 3-team trades where they could look to maybe dump a contract or take in one of those dumped contracts. Maybe Eric Gordon finds his way out to match money there. That's where Boban Marjanovic could potentially get used. Maybe KJ Martin becomes a swing piece in a 3-team trade. I think the Lakers could be a team interested as well, especially if a player like Eric Gordon became available. Maybe there's a chance too that KJ Martin or Garrison Matthews finds their way to LA. I think the Chicago Bulls are another good example as well, because you look at Chicago and, well, right now there's some question marks about the health of Lonzo Ball. Nikola Vucevic could be a contract that gets dumped this year. Houston, I think, could sniff around that as well. Now, I don't think that those two teams, the Lakers and Bulls, are the most likely outcomes. I think that those two teams are more likely to talk with other teams, but maybe that's where we see Houston still get involved in one of those 3-team trade components where they have to go in and be functionally available to help a deal get done, because sometimes the contracts don't add up perfectly because of the 125% rule, and you need a little bit of help from another organization. It's a really good way for Rafael Stone to build up a little bit of credibility with other executives working together and saying, hey, we're going to help you scratch our back later, though, because we would love to improve this team long term. And then I think another example here of what Houston could be potentially looking to buy, and this is one of the few ways that I look at them as a potential buyer, if there are teams selling players that are going to be headed toward restricted free agency. I think a player that really jumps out to my mind, Rui Hachimura from the Washington Wizards, likely will not get a contract extension with Washington. I would be surprised if Tommy Shepard gave him one. So maybe Houston says, hey, we'll take a flyer on that. Let's see what he is the last 2 months of the season for us, and we'll kind of recalibrate and go from there. The trade deadline is 2 months and 1 day until the end of the season, February 9th all the way to April 10th. It gives you a good trial run of seeing, hey, what could this player be for us? And then it gives you the ability to give him a qualifying offer. You have the bird rights on him then at that point to add those players back in. Like I said, Houston has cap space. If they're not confident they can sign players outright, maybe this restricted free agency strategy is not a bad way to attack and say, hey, if it costs us, maybe only a couple second round picks to bring in some of these younger players who we think could potentially be part of our long-term core, then it's definitely worth doing. Now, I don't think Rui Hachimura is necessarily the best fit, but I think he's a really good example of what I mean for Houston. So, what's my projected activity level? For the Houston Rockets, I think they're going to operate slowly, but I think there's going to be definitive talking throughout the trade process here. And I think they're going to be a really important team to helping facilitate other trades, especially in 3-team deals. And I think ultimately Eric Gordon probably does get traded. I think he's one of the few players that gets traded here from Houston. I'm not exactly sure for what yet. Again, I think 1 or 2 second-round picks is the most likely outcome. I would be very surprised if a team gives up a first unless it's, following some catastrophic injury that a team really needs to add some depth and they get a little desperate. I just don't think he's worth a first-round pick at this point. But I could see why the Rockets would want to hold out for one of those. Anytime you could trade a veteran for a first rounder, you do feel pretty good, especially if you're in Houston's shoes. But I think that Eric Gordon, probably not worth that. Now, maybe if they incentivize an Eric Gordon trade with KJ Martin on top, maybe that's where you see a first round pick come in, or maybe Garrison Matthews on his cheap, very team friendly deal. Maybe a team says, yeah, we'll upgrade 2 seconds to a first if this, and then there's going to be some protections on it, of course, too. Might not even be a current first, might be a down the road future first, but there's some teams definitely that are going to be in the mix. I think Houston sniffing around a D'Angelo Russell trade would be kind of fun too. Obviously he hasn't played great as of late, but you never know. I'm just throwing some stuff out here, lighting the fire a little bit stronger. But I think Houston is going to be a team to watch. I think it's definitely interesting to keep your eye on them because they have been pretty active in past trade deadlines. You think back to, the year that they traded James Harden. It was, the trade that broke the internet basically when the Nets put together that big three. Obviously, Rafael Stone pretty happy with how everything played out there in Brooklyn. They went from being a team that everyone thought was going to win the finals to one Harden pulled hamstring, completely changing the course of NBA history. Now he's playing in Philadelphia, still ringless. Pretty crazy turn of events, honestly. But I think Houston's going to be one of those teams that still there's a lot to watch for. They are, of course, a young developing team that they've shown some flashes this year, and don't discount that Suns Pelicans trajectory where if things start to go right at the right time, maybe they figure some things out, and who knows what they're going to be a year or two from now. Maybe they turn into a really good, young, dangerous team down the road. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. I've had a lot of fun recording these trade guides. There's a lot of work and research that goes into all of these. So if you do appreciate that, again, leaving that like lets me know you think I'm doing a good job. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I really, really do appreciate it. And again, just a huge thank you. 2022 has been an awesome year for utility sports, and I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. It's been such a blessing having all of your guys' love and support. So let me know in the comment section down below what teams you'd like to see next, and leave some nice thoughts if you have any as well. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.